Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. Those are the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. I am absolutely over the moon that today's guest, Erin Fairchild, agreed to come on the show. Erin has the most beautiful and inspiring Instagram account and business called Journal as Altar. And I've been very lucky to attend one of her workshops and receive her supplies and ephemera in the mail. And she's presenting at this year's Witches New Year event happening on October 15th and 16th, 2022. Erin is a social worker and a therapist, though not currently practicing, with expertise related to childhood trauma, attachment, things that are totally my jam, but also in preventing violence in systems and communities and families. In addition to Journal as Altar, Erin continues to work in the fields of equity-centered, trauma-informed care and violence prevention over at Collective Action Consulting. So I discovered Erin's work through that of one of my mentors, Desiree Attaway. You all know Desiree Attaway's work, actually, because she is the one who gave me permission to use her signature question, "What identities do you lead with?" as my opener in every interview. Anyway, Desiree and Erin have collaborated and co-facilitated multiple times on journaling as part of equity work. So they were working together. I saw that on Instagram. I was super fascinated and have followed Erin ever since, been very inspired. I love the idea of journaling as a more personal, private, introverted form of creative practice, but I seem to enjoy other people's journals more than my own. Erin's in particular, it's so beautiful. I love her style and her expression. I found that speaking with her, though, and thinking about this conversation a lot in the days since we spoke, it's really opened up a lot of space and more possibility for my own journaling practice. And then just by accident, totally looking for something else, I happened to find a journal of mine just today from my time at cooking school in Paris back in 1996. I've never been much of a journaler, so I totally don't remember keeping this journal, but I value it now so much, and it's probably time for an update. So I hope this episode inspires you too. Erin, so glad to have you here and excited to ask you this first question. What identities do you lead with?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And I love this as a starting question. It's really thoughtful. And actually, I feel like it's such a major question because I think a lot of my kind of way of being with myself and being in the world is trying to disentangle myself from the identities that are put on me and the way that my identities shape my worldview, even if my sort of choices might be, I want to yearn towards something different. The identities I was socialized into might be, often are, impacting deeper parts of myself than sometimes I want them to be. And then there's all the parts of my identity that are not visible to people when they look at me, and that are almost like more nuanced or complex than like a way to say an identity. And I love the question. So I think the identities that the world has me lead with that aren't necessarily like, I don't even know, I can't say I choose them or don't choose them, but the identities that the world sees is that I'm white, and you can't avoid that. That's very evident. And I'm fat. You can't avoid that when my body is perceived in public as fat. That's just the way it is. I have no problem with that. I'm definitely interested in fat liberation from a social justice perspective. The world is not quite there. So, that's complex. And then the other part of my, I guess, I could say so much, but to condense it a bit, I'm a queer person, and that part of my identity is often not visible to people unless they are also queer and kind of in on it with me.
Mhm.
Or when I'm with my partner, who is more, quote unquote, queer looking than I
Okay.
am, according to how people perceive queerness. So
Mm.
my identities are kind of like those identities are probably the most present and easy to name. But then there's all the identities like that are probably more deeply about who I am
Mm.
than those.
Mm.
So, and those are probably less like, I think, probably like my biggest, I'm like, how do I put this into words? But my probably biggest kind of anchor or guidepost or like sort of what drives me in this life is to live in a world where everyone's needs are met because everyone is interested in everyone's needs being met. Right. That it's like
Mm.
a thing we're collectively committed to. That I feel like is the biggest part of my identity. But how do you claim that as an identity? you
Mm.
know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Identities and archetypes. That seems like a
Mm-hmm.
whole conversation we should have at
Mm-hmm.
some point collectively, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. What about the term witch?
Mm-hmm.
Because, we're coming up into what some might call season of the witch. I'm doing a lot of episodes around Witches New Year, which is sort of October 31st, November 1st. And I know that I've had some very interesting answers. People were like, I do not relate to that term at all, or this is something that is slightly adjacent to that, or it's from my cultural lineage. What's your relationship to the term witch? Do aspects of that archetype resonate with you at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also love this question, especially as we're entering into the season. I would say that I am witch adjacent,
Okay.
witch parallel, and the reason I think that is also complex, but primarily is that I wouldn't say I have studied enough or have a lineage or like a deeply rooted enough practice to claim that as an identity. And I fully recognize that there are a lot of aspects of my life and my spiritual life in particular, my journaling practice, the way I show up in my work that is quote unquote witchy. And I also believe that a big aspect of being a witch is, in the way that I understand it, is to be involved in the work of ritual, of spell casting, and that can mean so many things to so many people. And then just being a really keen and present observer of space and time where we are and weaving that into something meaningful. So I do feel like I engage with witchery, if you will, in that way, but I don't feel like I am a witch because I don't know enough about, I mean, not that it needs to be gate kept. And I don't feel like I feel confident enough to claim that as an identity just because I don't think I have enough practice.
That
Yeah.
makes sense to me. And, witch is such an umbrella term. There's so many different lineages within that and just practices, traditions that are not dogmatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I think of you, I think of someone. So a really big aspect of the witch to me, that identity, that archetype is about working towards justice
Mm-hmm.
and liberation. And in a way, we're reclaiming the term witch because
Mm-hmm.
folks who were working towards collective
Mm-hmm.
access to the commons, for instance, or collective care, unionizing, political movements, all of that were branded witches. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I think of you and your work, it is so magical, it is so ritual, and it's so grounded in justice that I'd be like, oh yeah, she's a witch. So it's interesting that you're like, I don't know enough about it, because I'm like, oh well, it's like, we don't have to know how gravity works to have it work on us. It's like,
That's
I'm
true.
like, you're a witch, but I obviously will not put that on you.
I'll
But
say, how about if I say I'm not a witch?
yeah,
There we
exactly.
go.
Yeah, I'm not a witch. I'm witch adjacent. I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your journaling practice. So how did journaling enter your life, and like, do you still have some of your earliest journals? Are you one of those people
Mm.
who's like, I've been journaling since I could write at the age of 3? Like,
I have been journaling since I could write in one way or another. I don't think when I first learned to write, so it's probably when I started writing things down a lot and keeping books of writing and I used to make my own notebooks a lot. As soon as I had access to a stapler, I was kind of obsessed with stapling paper into books. So probably when I was around 5, I didn't know that I was keeping journals at the time. Didn't have that language that I recall anyway. And so it entered my life just so I can't say like one specific time. It just kind of happened organically. I was always drawn toward to art supplies and stationery and paper, particularly paper, and always had a real fondness for, like, I always find an affinity with a certain type of writing instrument. Even when I was that little, it was like this crayon, this color sharpened this way, is pleasing to me, and I need that. And I think I grew up in a pretty, like, a liberal and, like, I don't know if the word's unusual, but just my parents are amazing. They are very open-minded and pretty free thinking, and we're very different than the conservative rural community I grew up in. So we were always kind of a little bit against the grain. And they are very creative. My mom was a house painter when women weren't painting houses. My dad's a carpenter. We just grew up kind of working class and in that using our hands kind of way of being. And I think that shapes a lot of that part of me. And I do have a few core memories that really I can harken back to. Like, I can see an attachment forming to the act of having paper and scissors or glue or pens or crayons in my hand and having that feel important to me. And some of them really are connected to positive experiences with family members. Yeah.
I wonder if other people are also, I suddenly, as you were describing, like, I had these core memories. I had this image flash before my eyes, and it must have been like kindergarten or grade 1 when they used to have the glue. Remember the glue bottles that were like brown liquid glue, and they had a rubber top that you had to cut the little slit in it?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And how wonderful that felt, how empowering it was. And I really appreciate the way you talk about paper almost as an animistic way. Like, you have this strong affinity and
Yes.
relationship with paper, which it's like, yeah, of course I've had that. I remember going to a shop in my town called the Red Balloon in the 80s when you first saw those displays of the different 8.5 by 11s with paper that would have printed images, like maybe it would have balloons or maybe it would have clouds, or it was like kind of like pre-scrapbooking days, but you would write on that special paper. It was so expensive. Oh, wow. You're like bringing me back, Erin. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. So as we grow up, a lot of people do lose touch with like what brought them joy as a younger person. So why was that not the case for you?
Yeah, also a great question. To tie it back to the previous question, I do actually have not the first book I wrote in, but I do have a very early actual, like, formal diary. It had a little lock on it. I think I got it in 4th grade. It has a teddy bear on the cover, and I do have it. And what's interesting to me about and hard about it and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once is there's multiple pages in that diary where already at that age I'm like, I'm too fat to be loved. All my other classmates are, just listing all of these things about like what's wrong with me, really based on my body, because I was already receiving messages that my body was wrong. And to have that diary and look back at it is very meaningful. It's very powerful. Like I said, it's beautiful to have. It's also devastating, right? To be back in touch with that little person that I was, and she's still with me today. And I think that the act of being able to have a container for those feelings that felt at times out of control, the way that it shaped my identity. And from about 5th to 8th grade, I was bullied very intensely for my weight. Kind of like I was the butt of jokes at school. I was like visible pranks happening to me in front of other, like that. I wasn't getting physically beat up. I will say I didn't go that far, but it was pretty brutal for several years. And the act of having journals and writing in journals and also just engaging with craft of any kind. I made paper a lot. That's another story. It's very funny, actually, some of the nerdy stuff that I did. But like the sneaky behavior I engaged in was like stealing laundry lint and then waiting for my parents, even though they would let me do it. I made it into like a controversy. I waited until they weren't home and made paper with like the laundry lint. And I forget, it was like, I was like in 5th grade, and a picture frame and the ironing board. I think it's because I assumed they wouldn't let me use the iron, but they would have.
Yeah.
They
Right.
definitely would have. They were pretty like, open-minded. But anyway, so I was that kind of a kid. And so those things were always soothing to me. And so there's definitely this connection between experiencing harm, and sometimes causing harm. Let's be real. I wrote about that in my diaries too. Like, here's the mean stuff that we did when we ganged up on Heather today. And I was already grappling with all of that complexity in my journals. And so I think to me, they're like, the reason that practice has stayed with me is because when my life was overwhelming, my journals and diaries caught me.
Wow. My gosh, how fortunate. Like, thanks, past Erin, for keeping those journals so that you would have this like archaeological record to go through and, feel validated perhaps sometimes, I imagine, because not having access to those direct words, I think as adults we can also be perplexed by our behavior or our feelings because we don't sort of quote unquote remember the root of it. Like, where is this coming from? We blocked it out. It was too long ago. It's like kind of blurry. It was a traumatic time. Our hippocampus wasn't quite functioning right. You have an actual record and can go back and be like so compassionate to that little self. I imagine this is why you became a therapist. Is that right?
It has a big part to do with why I became a therapist. I think for a lot of people who have been on the receiving end of oppressive dynamics or of abuse of any kind, we are more likely to get drawn into helping professions. So there's that. And then I also became a therapist because I started working pretty young in my life with children impacted by trauma. And I just kind of identified with and felt I didn't experience trauma from my parents at home, other family members anyway, I had a safe and stable childhood. Let's say that. Other than what was happening at school, which didn't feel safe. But I think early on, I was able to pair the experiences of children living with trauma with kind of like, I had some traumatic experiences, but I had all of these safe adults in my life, and my creative practices and school really held me up. And here I was working with young people where school was not a good experience for them. They were being dismissed, being treated like they were disposable. Their goodness, their inherent goodness, not being recognized by the systems around them. And that does have to do with having been bullied. And it does have to do with having a record of it and being able to see, like, I can look back and kind of know with some level of clarity why I have still to this day, no matter how much therapy I do, it's that stuff that trauma is still present with me. And I know why. I could just see for kids who aren't getting the feedback and don't have that container, that they don't know why, and they feel like they're the problem.
Yeah.
And that's never the case. It's never the child's never the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, everybody gets to just revel in that for a moment, like press that in. The child is never the problem. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so you talked about ganging up on Heather. You talked about all this other stuff. Okay. Have you ever had like a Harriet the Spy situation with your journal where like someone read it and was like, wow, like, and it caused conflict? Because I think about negative experiences that I've heard of with other people, that I've been on the receiving end. I think that's maybe one reason why some people are a little bit of afraid of keeping a journal. Cause like, what if someone reads it and discovers I'm a horrible person, or like can weaponize what I'm, vulnerable about? Have you ever had a situation like that with your journal?
I haven't. I actually have not had a situation like that with a journal. One time, kind of parallel to that, my mom did find when she was doing my laundry. She was not a snooper. She would not. Neither of my parents would ever have read my diaries. But when she was doing my laundry, when I was probably like in junior high, she just was pulling out my pockets to put them, and there was a note that I'd been passing back and forth with someone. This is actually kind of funny. It's actually very funny to me. And I don't know. No, it's not TMI. It's just
Okay.
real. My friend and I were joking and kind of in a problematic way that's reminiscent of the time, and also in a I'm a repressed lesbian way. We were writing back and forth, and one of us said like, "You look pretty today." The other one said, and then one of us wrote, I can't remember who wrote, "But I'm not a lesbian." And then there was this whole thread of us passing this note back and forth and talking, accusing each other of being gay in a
Okay.
joking way, but
Yeah.
also in a problematic way,
Yeah.
so tangled up. And my mom, I must have been like 13, I think, found the note. And my mom, being the mom that she is, was like, "Is there something that you want to talk to me about, Erin?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? You're such a weird hippie. Leave me alone." That was me. I was a handful. And she was like, "Well, I found this note and you're talking about being gay in it. And I just want you to know that if that's the case, it's okay. And we can talk about it and you don't have to hide it." And I was just like, "Mom, gross. You know,
Right.
Mom, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. We were just joking.
Yeah.
Get out of here."
Yeah.
And then, I guess probably maybe 6 years later, 7 years later, when I came out, she was like, "Yeah, we know."
Aw.
So
She's like, so sweet, honey.
she
Yeah.
she is so sweet. Both of my parents are amazing in that way. But to answer the question, I mean, it wasn't a journal; it was a letter, but kind of similar to a journal. And though I haven't had a traumatic experience or a difficult experience with people interacting with my journals, that question that you asked, though, is present in every workshop that I teach. So when I
Mhm.
teach journaling, creative journaling workshops on various themes, there's almost always at least a few people that express being afraid to start, or they start and then they stop, or it just becomes a creative barrier because they
Mhm.
are afraid of their journals being read. And often it's because they'll just say in the chat, or
Mhm.
sometimes people send me emails, actually, not even just straight from my website, in the
Mhm.
contact me, that are like, where they share, "I'm having a really hard time getting started because this person found my diary or my journal, and here's how they used it against me, and it
Mhm.
it took away this practice is really important to me, and I don't know how to get it back." And so a lot of
Yeah.
my work is about helping people try to create ritual and safe space in the context of a journal, so they can get back to that feeling of safety.
Mm, mm. Oh, that's nice to know that that comes up, and that's a big part of
It
it. Because
does.
mine is almost like the secondary trauma of experiencing it through other people, or like
Hmm.
experiencing so and so wrote about you, or that kind of thing. And so I'm like, I don't know why this is so hard for me, but I do think that's a big barrier, is like witnessing such a violation.
Hmm.
So I appreciate that that's a big part of your work.
I
Yeah.
think I'm actually, yeah, I'm in the process right now because it's come up so much of designing either, I don't know, some writing or workshop or some content that is specifically about when journaling doesn't feel good or easy,
Yeah.
because of a variety of things, but including because people might have used your journals, like, to use your words in a way that weaponized them against you.
Mm, oh, brilliant. Oh, I like, thank
Mhm.
you. That's good. So good. Amplifying that. So, what do you do when you personally, Erin, are like creatively blocked? Do you ever, first of all, it's kind of hard to imagine you being creatively blocked. I look and it's just like, wow, this person is like a fountain of creativity. So,
Thank you.
do you ever get blocked? What do you do when you get blocked? And kind of parallel to that, like, what do you do if you just don't really like what you created? I feel
Mm.
maybe also like I'm just being super, like, full transparency. I'm like, help me, Erin. But like, do you ever have those experiences?
Yeah, of course I do. I think that typically what happens for me is not necessarily that I have a creative block. I think for me the problem, it's not a problem. The reality is there's more in my head than I could get out in
Mm.
one lifetime, it feels like, or in one 2 week period or whatever it is, right? There's like there I don't think that I'm really at a loss for creative ideas, but I sometimes, actually fairly often, just don't have the energy to get it out. So it's
Mm.
not so much like I don't have an idea, but what blocks me more is like I'm actually still scrolling on Instagram and now I'm tired, just to be a real person. Or
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
we're now binge watching something and I'm doing that instead of journaling, or other time conflicts like work, or I just started gardening recently in a major way, like jumped right in like full force. And so that also takes time. So there's other avenues, right? That creativity comes out. But I do have people often don't believe me, or it doesn't seem this way based from my social media presence, but I'll go weeks sometimes without journaling. I have a daily practice, but I don't always do it.
Gotcha. Oh, wait a second. Can you say more about that? You're like, I have a daily practice where I like think about journaling.
I have a daily I always think about journaling. Yes. So
Mm,
I think about it like every day because it's comforting to me. It's just like
mm,
a well-worn pathway in my brain. So if I'm not
mm,
journaling, I'm thinking about it. I have the
mm.
intention of a daily practice and I know what it looks like and feels like. And
Okay.
sometimes I don't do it.
Gotcha. I love that though.
If that
You
makes
don't just like
sense.
discard it, or you don't like um let that slip as an identity or like as a practice just
Mm-mm.
because you're not doing it right then. Oh, that's really relieving. Mm,
Well, so many of the themes that I think that come up for people from my experience, in this space, is a lot of, in addition to ways people have been hurt before from people interacting with their journals, is just a lot of policing ourselves and setting internal goals that honestly are not grounded in anything other than our own. Like no one else in the world cares or knows unless I tell them
yeah.
that if I do my daily practice every day, it's not, really shouldn't be a way that I'm measuring my worth as a person. And yet people
Mhm.
often say want to talk about, sometimes I do one-on-one sessions to support people, sometimes it's in the context of workshops, sometimes people just DM me on social media, but I'm so behind in my journaling. I had a
Mhm.
goal and now I'm 45 days behind. I haven't journaled in 3 months and it feels impossible because I need to go back and fill in all those pages. And
Mm,
my practice now at this point, having struggled with that, or just not really it's like that's kind of overstating it, but if having faced that, and my practice is like, just start today, because your
mhm,
journal doesn't care. Your journal actually does not care if there are 3 months of blank pages. And I
mhm,
do talk to my journals and treat them in an animistic way. They are living
mhm,
things to me.
mm,
My journals are allies. They're not. I just wrote a thing about how they're not judges and juries. They're they're
mm,
they're in solidarity with me. So
mm,
if I took 3 months of time, it's because I needed to take 3 months of time.
mhm.
And then I go back sometimes and, I will just change if they're predated pages, I'll just go back and change the date, or
Right.
I'll decide, oh, these are practice pages now. So just like
Yeah.
scribble.
Oh. Oh, that's also very relieving. I'm like, deep breath. That just feels like, the permission is really helpful, I think, for
Mhm.
those of us who do get caught up a little bit. So one of your I don't know what you call it, slogans, phrases. It's a sticker that I got in my workshop
Yeah.
kit is these pages are portals. What
Mhm.
do you mean when you say these pages are portals? Where are you
Mhm.
going? Where are we going?
Well, when I started thinking about the concept of treating my journals like altars, really, it was reflecting back on this lifetime of engaging with paper, a paper practice, paper craft, journaling. Sometimes it was scrapbooking. I've always been slightly embarrassed, but just to be real, to be like, I'm a scrapbooker, because it feels sort of like, I don't know, there's so much associated with that also is, this is me calling myself out, because it really is binary thinking or supremacy thinking, to be
Right.
like, there's certain types of craft or art that are, worthy and relevant, and some that are
Yeah.
just like silly.
Yeah.
And there's also
A
so much
caricature.
caricature, and
Yeah.
there's so much sexism in that too, honestly,
Yeah.
like stereotypes of who might be doing that. But anyway,
Mhm.
all of those practices have been helpful to me and fun and a good part of my life. And um, I forgot where I was going.
Well, when you started treating your
Oh
journals as
yeah, there we go.
altars. Yeah.
Right, right. So when I started treating, I got lost in the thread of papercraft. When I started treating my journals as altars, it was really a result of me looking back at the impact of the practice in my life over personal experiences, but also once I became a social worker and a therapist, and I started getting more engaged in policy and, um, micro and macro social justice level violence prevention, and a variety of other, contexts where I was consistently exposed to trauma and grief and loss and oppression and community, and with people I was supporting intimately. I realized that the way I was supporting myself in my journal felt like it needed a different word to make it have more weight, because it and then Well, and then I realized that my journals were altars. That's why they feel kind of like living things to me, is that my journals are altars to possibility and potential, to the world I dream about for all of us. And I need to hold the threads of those dreams to not get weighted down by the grief of the work that I do. And so when I say this page is a portal or these pages are portals, it's really an invitation for anyone accessing those words to dream and vision the world you want and make it come to life on a page. And it could be that you're just doing it with like the color that it would feel to you, or you have stickers that feel good, or you cut pieces out of magazines and you make a collage, or you press flowers and you write about what your dream and your vision is. And sometimes the dream and the vision is I just want to like fold my laundry and put it away. And I'm going to just make a to-do list about it. And
Right.
a lot of times for me, the dream and vision is, that big part of my identity that I mentioned earlier that I'm still trying to kind of figure out, which is that I want everyone to have what they need because we're all interested in helping everyone have what they need, not because we're like following rules or we're in trouble for not doing it, or that we move towards it together. That's, just the idea of collective liberation and well-being. And I need to keep writing it down and reminding myself. And so doing it in an artistic or creative way just helps me stay inspired and connected to that concept.
Mm. Well, I want to give a little bit more love to scrapbooking because I'm thinking about your younger self who is essentially writing a diary. Like I think
Mhm.
when a lot of people are like journaling, you sit down, you're writing words and it's like a narrative diary. It's like, just like
Mhm.
we've done throughout history and where I'm archiving my day. But there's something about scrapbooking, which is like, I'm going to embellish, I'm going to like
Mhm.
create the feeling of my day or the
Mhm.
feeling of this event or whatever it is. And then you're taking it somewhere else where it's like, and what are we trying to vision and why is that important? Because I do wonder if those of us who think about journals as diaries,
Mhm.
like when I think about like what am I putting in here? It's like what kind of prompts are you,
Yeah.
well, like what happened for you, Erin, that shifted you? I'm just thinking about scrapbooking because it's like how did you shift from this like
Mhm.
linear, more cognitive diary of
Mhm.
events to this is a portal to the world I'm trying to collectively
Mhm.
co-create, and it's an emergent property with this being that is the journal.
There is always this emergent that quality to often the way that I keep journals. It's also both and because I do still do some people call it memory keeping now. That's like the cool modern memory keeping,
Oh, okay.
scrapbooking, and a lot of I actually do make lots of pages that are linear. Like here's what I did today. I want to remember this. Here's something funny someone said. Sometimes I write what we ate for dinner because it was good. I do keep some track of some mundane details in my journals. And I still think that when I do that, they're altars, because I want to also try to find magic in the mundane to get through this life. I just feel like we're living in times where it's difficult to be human when we're living in such inhumane times. It's just to be a human in inhumane times is very overwhelming. And so trying to bring magic into like what I had for dinner tonight and I'm going to write it down and draw a little picture of it. To me it feels good. I think there's lots of people that do that might not attach that significance to it, and that's fine too if they enjoy doing it. There's no right or wrong. So I do focus on linear, mundane details, just like sort of daily stuff. And then when I feel most inspired and most like I want to tap into the collective and feel held by my journal and feel held by the wisdom that's come before me. And sometimes what am I learning from my ancestors? How am I moving forward to correct some of those mistakes or to be in better relationship anyway with the people and the places around me than they might have been? um, though that's when I'm tapping into that feeling, that's when my pages become like a portal. Like sometimes I'll just write on a page, if I write this page is a portal and then I say, um, I did one recently that was like I just wrote down, um, everyone is swimming in a river and we're laughing, and um, we sang songs. I was kind of capturing like when I went camping with friends, but it was like in this vision, it's like everyone is swimming and laughing. We have fresh fruit. We feel safe and comfortable and good in that moment. Everyone has what they need. The breeze is blowing. We're not thinking about all the things that are wrong. We're here. That to me is like that really did happen. And also that page is now a portal to me because um, I want to hold on to it, and I want to be able to access that feeling when I look at the page. Sometimes this page as a portal is like, trans children know they're sacred because of the way we treat them, the way the world treats them, right? And that's like, I want us to go there together. So I'm just making a page that's kind of almost like pretending like it's real. Yeah.
Casting the spell.
Right. I mean, that's what it is. In a way, it is spell casting. It brings us back to the question about identifying as a witch, and I think there's lots of ways that I probably show up in it that are witchy or make me a witch, um, and I'll just be just constantly understanding what my relationship to that word is.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we move to this last question, I'm finding myself feeling like there's the obvious answer of journaling, right? How do you cope with grief and rage? Obviously, journaling is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were to get like more granular, how do
Mm-hmm.
you, Erin, how do you cope
Mm-hmm.
with grief and rage?
You know, I have this whole part of my life structured around journaling, and journaling's not enough to handle grief and rage. So I appreciate that part of the question. Um, and I don't know that there's any handling of it anyway to begin with, but just to like, how do I cope with it? How do I navigate it? I think that that's always shifting how that happens, and I think primarily probably the biggest, it's not a strategy, like what's the word, just the most dominant way of being for me in relationship with grief and rage is to try to remind myself and remember that the depth of the grief I feel is also the depth of the joy and love that I feel. And I just spoke recently about this in a workshop about when I started in social work in working in domestic violence shelters when I was in my early 20s. I think I was 21, and I was focused on children and children's programming in domestic violence shelters. And I was very, I knew that I was like, okay, something's happening for me. Like my career's going in this way and there's no denying it. I feel this, I feel in my purpose. I feel called to this, and it's really, really hard. And I am like up close and personal with some of the most brutal ways that families and systems can betray each other and children. And how am I going to be in close proximity to all of this and form closeness and connection with kids and families in this situation without becoming consumed by grief and rage? And I started, I just started seeking basically like, how do I do this? How do I hold this? And I luckily just like stumbled across this book called The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching. I think it's called Transforming Suffering and Loss into Joy and Liberation. I got that wrong, but it's something similar to that by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I read it at this just like foundational part of my life where it just like I felt it land like so strongly with me, and that honestly has so much to do with and my upbringing too. But those two things paired together just mean that I feel like I never want my eyes to be closed to injustice or to grief or to sorrow, because it's what makes us. It just makes it easier for me to love you more deeply, you know, and to love myself more deeply. And I also feel like to me, it feels very evident and grief filled to see the way that I mean, I'm talking about America or North America. I know you're in Canada. Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
Canada in North America?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
bad at geography. I can edit that part out.
We're the north part. Yeah.
Or don't, who cares? Yeah. So anyway, from like I guess like a white Western, not indigenous to this place, mentality, there's so many people, there's so much sorrow to be witnessed right now. And I think what's happening is there's this collective continuation and deepening of numbing, of like finding ways to push it out and to pretend like it's not happening. And unfortunately, I feel that because we don't have these containers, especially as white Western people, for the grief and the rage that we feel, the numbing out is becoming more violent. Like the numbing and the pushing away is like, getting more desperate is what it feels like to me. And that's also a reminder of I need to make space for all of it. And just try to keep that. Well, a lot of my work in my journals actually is like, what was I amazed by today in spite of being terrorized by grief? What was something that like that held me up today? The smallest thing I can find sometimes is enough.
Thank you for sharing that and naming that sometimes even the smallest thing is enough, because I think of that as a very like collapse friendly way to be. So, it's like you gotta developing the practice and the skill of scanning for what was amazing, what was delightful, and being able to rest in it and linger there. We got to start small, and we have to be. Well, I think it's Adrienne Marie Brown calls it satisfiable. Like that has to be enough sometimes. So is it enough to notice the small thing? Is it enough to have a practice that you didn't do today? But that being is there, not as judge and jury, but as in solidarity. Those are really beautiful teachings. I really can't wait for your session at Witches New Year now. I mean, obviously I was excited. I would invite you, but like, it's like, ooh, now I'm feeling really jazzed. So
Oh, good. Me too. I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you for being on the show today, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. I had a really good time.
Okay, seriously, the value you get when you sign up for a Journal as Altar workshop, it blew me away. The care package that comes with like little stickers and ephemera, scrapbooking materials is so charming, so fabulous. And I just hugely respect people who deliver such high value in their offerings. And Erin just seems so generous, and it really shows in what you receive in the mail, the care that you can feel in every detail of her business. To find the links to Erin's workshops and her website and her Substack community and everything she offers, you can head to the show notes for this episode at numinouspodcast.com. And many thanks to Erin for coming on the show. So listener shout out. So as always, the top downloads are going to be from the US and then Canada, the UK, and then sometimes it's Australia, sometimes it's a European country, but very rarely does it go US, Canada, Italy. What's happening? Italia, come va? Mi manchi, è passato così tanto. Ti amo tanto, grazie mille. Ciao, ciao. Thank you, Italy. I miss you. Finally, friends, remember that The Spirited Kitchen is available for pre-order online or from your local independent bookseller. Just ask them to bring it in. And in fact, many of them have online shopping and will ship to you. So if you're a Canadian customer, you can order from monroesbooks.com and get 20% off if you pre-order. So, it's worth investigating if you can buy from your local seller. Anyway, wherever you buy it, bring your receipt back to my website to receive your instant bonus downloads. So just go to the cookbook tab at carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.